The war in Syria and the simmering conflict on the Donbass have tended to obscure significant changes within the Russian ground forces, namely the raising of new motorized rifle and tank divisions on the basis of permanent readiness brigades, the reactivation of regiments within existing reduced-strength divisions, and the creation of numerous artillery and air defense brigades and other non-divisional units, apparently for inclusion in the combined arms and tank armies for which the new divisions are being intended. News reports from just the last few weeks have identified the following units undergoing reactivation procedures. The 42nd Guards Red Banner Evpatoria Motorized Rifle Division, which is being rebuilt using two motorized rifle brigades stationed within the Republic of Chechnya, assigned to the 58th Army of the Southern Military District. The 90th Guards Twice Red Banner Vitebsk Novgorod Tank Division being reconstituted on the basis of the 7th Guards Separate Tank Brigade stationed in Chelyabinsk region and assigned to the Central Military District. The 150th Order of Kutazov Idritsa Berlin Motorized Rifle Division stationed in the Rostov region and assigned to the Southern Military District. The 10th Guards Red Banner Order of Suvorov, Kutazov and October Revolution Urals-Lyov Tank Division assigned to the Western Military District and stationed in the Voronezh region near the border with Ukraine. This division is being reformed using a divisional mobilizational base. Furthermore, the 4th Guards Kantemirovskaya Tank Division and the 2nd Guards Tamanskaya Motorized Divisions, stationed within the Western Military District in the vicinity of Moscow and assigned to the newly reformed 1st Guards Tank Army, have received an additional tank and motorized rifle regiment, respectively, to return them to full strength. In all cases, the units follow divisional organizations roughly similar to late Soviet-era formations, with the tank divisions having 3 tank and 1 motorized rifle regiments, and motorized rifle divisions having 3 motorized rifle and 1 tank regiment. It has not been reported whether the individual regiments will similarly follow the standard 3+1 mix of motorized rifle and tank battalions, though it appears likely they will do so. The units will utilize the standard range of equipment used by Russian heavy forces, including T-90A and T-72B3 main battle tanks, BMP-3, BMP-2, and BTR-82 infantry fighting vehicles, 2 S-19 self-propelled howitzers, BM-21 multiple rocket launchers, plus self-propelled air defense gun and missile systems. Eventually, the divisions will start receiving latest generation weapons that were first exhibited during the 2015 Victory Day Parade, such as the T-14 MBT, Kurganets and Boomerang IFVs, T-15 Heavy IFV, 2 S-35 Koilitsia SV self-propelled howitzer, as well as possible upgraded T-90 AM and BPM-3M vehicles. While no re-equipment schedule has been announced, it seems highly likely the units of the 1st Guards Tank Army, which will form the Ground Forces Strategic Reserve to be used in decisive defensive and offensive operations, will enjoy the top priority in that regard. The activation of these units is being accompanied by equally significant reinforcement of non-divisional formations such as separate artillery, air defense, and combat engineer brigades and battalions that would naturally support the larger units during high-intensity combat operations conducted by the 1st Guards Tank and 20th Combined Arms Armies. Separate motorized rifle and tank brigades that are not being converted into divisions have also had their troop and equipment strengths increased, and there are reports that some of them will become all-volunteer for rapid reaction and possible expeditionary missions. The fact these are costly, long-term investments in Russia's security along its western borders suggests that, in spite of the political changes in the West illustrated by the election of Donald J. Trump, Brexit, the Italian referendum, the Russian leadership does not necessarily view them as indicators of an irreversible and permanent change in Western policies, away from regime change, color revolutions, and confrontation with Russia. EU especially is experiencing the worst crisis of its short existence, and the prospect of its disintegration is driving its elites to frame Russia as a threat to the EU's, through such means as, if Western media are to be believed, hacking, propaganda, and even weaponizing giant squids in order to preserve some semblance of European unity. The prospect of Ukraine's collapse as a state has had the effect of increasing Ukrainian bombardments and provocations along the border with Novorossiya. Finally, many in the US and indeed in Europe are correctly perceiving the recent developments in Aleppo as a victory for Russia and a defeat for themselves, which will naturally prompt them to take revenge elsewhere. The ongoing modernization and expansion of ground forces are by far the most important component of Russia's conventional forces, indicates that the Kremlin is aware the crisis has not yet passed. Indeed, it may not have even reached its peak yet. The Armata tank has become a real challenge for NATO tank builders. Design officers of Western countries were discouraged by the tanks passing into service, which has the most advanced features in terms of mobility, protection and firepower. That is why tank builders have had to adjust their current projects on future tanks and prepare them for a possible confrontation with the Armata on the battlefield. But are the efforts being made to catch up to the Russian engineers successful? At the Euro-Satori exhibition, which was held in June in France, German weapons company Rheinmetall presented a promising sample of a 130mm gun, L-51, which is aimed at combating modern armored vehicles, including Russian main battle tanks MBT T-14 and the Armata. The latest modifications to the T-90 were also presented. Manufacturers are affirming that the gun will be between 10% and 50% more efficient than the previous model of the 120mm gun, the L-55, which is widely used in the army. However, the manufacturer has not reported on the method of estimation for the effectiveness of the gun. Despite the increase in the firepower of the gun, its weight remains almost the same. The shutter with a vertical locking mechanism weighs about 3 tons and the trunk has a weight of 1,400 kilograms. This result is achieved through the use of high-tech materials and optimal design that allows for the new gun to be used on existing tanks of the latest modification, such as the German Leopard 2A7. This means that the weapon can be distributed widely. It can also be installed on the projecting German-French tank, the MGCS, which is anticipated to be placed into service after 2030. To increase the armor penetration for the gun, new, longer and heavier projectiles were developed. Armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot to APF SDS, as were separable trays and high-explosive air-bursting munitions HEABM. Despite the manufacturer's declaration of the significant increase in the firepower of the guns, experts have expressed doubts. The sample that was presented is designed for manual loading, and experts have confirmed that the rapidity of fire cannot exceed more than 6 to 8 rounds per minute. The T-14 has an auto loader which provides for the rapidity of fire of about 10 to 12 rounds per minute. Regarding the increased efficiency of the gun's shot, as claimed by Rheinmetall, it must be noted that the round's DM63 for the previous gun model, the RH-120 L-55, which is installed on the tank Leopard 2, has a penetration of up to 800mm of homogeneous armor. Therefore, an efficiency of 10% in the L-51 model yields 880mm. In comparison, Armata's 125mm gun, the 2A82-1M, provides armor penetration of between 850mm and 1000mm. The 152mm gun, the 2A83, which has been tested in the 90s and into the century, will be installed on Russian tanks in the future. Hit 1 at 24mm of homogeneous armor. It is known that field tests of the German guns were not carried out and that the gun has not been set on a real tank. Therefore, it is hardly possible that a 50% improvement in the performance of the German gun can be said to be achieved. The Russian tank crew is set in a separate capsule protected by a modern, multi-layer counter-heat protection effect armor. In addition, a dynamic Armata Malachit protection system and the active protection system Afghanit provide protection against all existing anti-tank weapons. Finally, according to Armata's developers, the mounted machine gun, which obtains data from the Active Electronically Scanned Array AESA radar, is able to protect the tank by knocking the flight of anti-tank missiles and changing the trajectory of the rounds or damaging cumulative jets. It appears doubtful whether the new German gun can defeat such a fortress at this stage, even with a possible 50% increase in its efficiency. Of course, much depends on the situation awareness systems used, the ammunition, fire correction systems and electronic warfare, but it will take years or decades to develop such a combat complex and corresponding strategy of its application. It should be kept in mind that Russian engineers will continue to design more sophisticated armaments. Since it is possible to now assert that the Armata is currently the most powerful and protected main battle tank in the world, Rheinmetall's affirmations that the gun can defeat the T-14 are seen as a marketing ploy in an attempt to attract the attention of potential customers to the objective problem of the need to combat the modern Russian tank. The arms concern also raises the question of the expansion of financing for such developments. Clearly the Western, or at least the European tank building industry is behind the Russian industry. Nevertheless, the US military technologies could pose a significant threat to Armata. as demonstrated by the Future Combat Systems FCS and familiar doctrines. The US military strategists are betting on the interaction of unmanned and mixed combat systems operating in 3 dimensions: ground, air, and space. According to this approach, the target should be defeated from the zone located beyond the line of sight of the enemy. For example, a promising lightly armored 20-ton tank, the XM-1202 Project FCM, equipped with a 120mm gun XM-360, was supposed to launch the mid-range munitions MIMKE or MIMCE to a distance of 12 kilometers and targeted with drones, Class 1 T-Hawk or 4-Fire Scout. It is therefore more likely that in the coming years we will see more Armata-orientated systems of weapons and even so-called Armata killers.
Mikhail Kalashnikov's masterpiece has been the Soviet and Russian military's principal individual weapon for nearly 7 decades, and it is a testimony to the brilliance of the design that it defies replacement and instead lends itself to further modification. The most important change to the original AK design took place in the 1970s with the adoption of the AK-74, which, instead of the original 7.62mm intermediate round, used a lighter 5.45mm high-velocity round, which gave the weapon greater accuracy and improved lethality. The AK-74 in turn gave way to the 1990s vintage AK-74M, which introduced composites to the design, giving it that characteristic black rifle look, and included a number of other improvements to improve its durability and facilitate the use of night vision and aiming devices. Now the Russian military is facing a choice of whether to stick to the time-tested design or to adopt a new assault rifle that would replace the venerable AK. The list of AK-74 challengers is a long one. The first proposed replacement was the Nikonov AN-94 Abkan, whose remarkable 2-round burst technology was unfortunately offset by the weapon's complexity. More recently, the Ratnik individual soldier system, profiled in an earlier edition of the Russian Defense Report, prompted the Russian military to solicit proposals for the AK-74 follow-on. 2 rifles were entered, the AEK-971, whose balanced action design virtually eliminated recoil, and the Kalashnikov concern's AK-12, which was designed by Vladimir Zlobin. After a prolonged series of trials, the Russian Ministry of Defense made a decision in February 2015 in favor of Kalashnikov's AK-12. The AK-12 combines its predecessor's best qualities with improved accuracy and ergonomics. Its design allows the operator to perform key operations, like releasing the magazine or manipulating the safety and selector switch, with one hand and without the need to take the finger off the trigger. The AK-12 is also better suited to accept a variety of attachments, such as sighting devices, laser designators, forward hand grips, night vision devices, and the associated mounts, such as the Picatinny rail, which has become a world standard and without which no modern rifle can do without. In addition to the standard AK-74 and RPK magazines, the AK-12 can use the newly designed 60-round and 90-round magazines. Does that mean that the Izhmash plant will soon be churning out millions of AK-12 rifles to replace the AK-74 series weapons currently in service? It does not appear likely. Part of it has to do with Russia's ongoing budget pinch, which has forced revisions to a number of other defense procurement plans. But the bigger reason is that the AK-12 just does not offer enough of an advantage to warrant such a dramatic rearmament. Russia is not unique in that respect. The US military has held several major competitions to identify a successor to the M16 and M4 weapons, and yet these rather flawed rifles will continue in service for decades to come, because the potential replacement's performance advantage is insufficient to warrant the cost. The May 2016 decision to equip the newly formed National Guard with AK-74M rifles is one of the indicators that the Russian leadership is instead opting in favor of continued modifications of existing rifles with the designation of AK-74M3. Several hundred of these rifles, referred to at the time as AK-74M Obvez, were seen already during the victory parade in May 2015. The AK-74M3 introduces a new buttstock design, a new hand grip, and changes to the receiver cover to facilitate the use of Picatinny rails, in addition to other improvements. The AK-12, on the other hand, will most likely be purchased in relatively small numbers for use by specialized and elite units, much as the way the US and other NATO countries issue more advanced and expensive designs to its elite forces while retaining older weapons in service. As is usually the case, the question of the relative importance of the AK-74M3 and the AK-12 to the Russian military will likely be shown by their presence or absence at this year's and future victory parades.
One of the key sectors of Russian military modernization is its tank fleet, which still includes many unmodernized T-72B and T-80U tanks. In order to close the tank quality gap with NATO, Russia opted to upgrade the T-72B to the T-72B3 standard, a modernization that yielded a modern tank comparable to the T-90 at a fraction of the cost of buying a new T-90. The T-72B3 tank, which entered service in 2011 at the rate of about 200 a year, and which became widely known thanks to the annual tank biathlon competitions, was intended to be a stopgap measure until the T-14 of the Armata family became operational. According to statements by the Uralvagonzavod, Russian procurement plans entailed the purchase of 2,000 T-14 MBTs. These plans appear to have been modified due to several factors which appeared in the last 2 years. The first was the crisis in Ukraine and the heightened state of conflict with NATO. The crisis raised the need for a truly modern MBT comparable to NATO's tanks to become operational as quickly as possible. While the T-72B3 can be fairly described as a modern tank, it is still inferior in some respects to the latest NATO Leopard 2A6 and M1A2 Abrams tanks. Secondly, the basic T-90 design was also rapidly becoming dated, which reduced its international competitiveness, as evidenced by the success of Ukraine's Aplot tank in the 2011 competition in Thailand, where it won over the T-90. While the T-90 has enjoyed considerable export success, including major contracts with India and Algeria, it is now facing the prospect of being eclipsed by more recent designs from China and even Ukraine. Third, even though Ukraine proved unable to fulfill the Thailand contract in a timely manner, producing only 5 tanks a year in 2014 and 2015, the Russian leadership has to consider the worst-case scenario of Ukraine ramping up a plot production for domestic use with NATO's assistance. Fourth, Russia's economic crisis, caused mainly by the rapid drop of oil prices, means that the ambitious military modernization plans face the need of being as cost-effective as possible. Fifth, the T-14 is a radical design featuring many revolutionary technologies. It is a technologically risky project featuring many as yet unproven technologies with the possibility of developmental delays. Since its design is very different from earlier Russian tank designs, its introduction would also require considerable changes to the training doctrine, as tank crews trained to use Russia's current tanks would be ill-prepared to use the T-14. As a result, it would be unlikely that Russia could field a sizable and fully operational T-14 force before 2020 at the earliest. The change to Russian procurement plans induced by these factors became apparent in the summer of 2015, when the Russian MOD announced its T-90 fleet would be modernized to the T-90AM variant. This version of the T-90, known by its export designation of T-90SM, was developed in recent years, apparently in response to the T-90's aging and the emergence of viable Chinese and Ukrainian competitors, and was not intended for adoption by the Russian military. However, the need for a quicker and less expensive alternative that would fill the gap until the T-14 became available compelled the Russian MOD to take a second look at the T-90AM, which has the advantage of using already existing T-90 hulls, is a mature project with few developmental risks, and whose familiar layout means Russian tank crews can readily transition to the new design. At least one T-90AM with the 2A82 125mm tank gun developed for the T-14 is undergoing tests at Nizhny Tagil, and upgraded vehicles could be delivered to Russian units as early as 2016 if the Russian MOD desires it. Therefore, by 2025, Russia's tank fleet is likely to consist of about 1,000 T-72B3 tanks, 400 or so T-90AM, and about 500 T-14s, with their numbers steadily increasing. This force would have both qualitative and numerical superiority over any conceivable combination of Russia's opponents at that time.